Why did the room laugh before she ever spoke? The general's voice hadn't even finished echoing off the concrete walls when the snickers began. Low at first, then louder, boots scraping, shoulders shaking. Someone muttered something cruel about rank, someone else about gender. She stood near the back of the briefing room, hands clasped behind her spine, eyes forward. Still, like she had learned long ago that movement invited judgment. "A sniper," the general repeated. "One volunteer." Silence followed, heavy, expectant. Then she stepped forward. Not confidently, not dramatically, just one measured step, the kind taken by someone who already knew the cost. The laughter stopped. Not because they respected her, but because the general had frozen mid-breath. His eyes locked onto her face like he'd seen something buried rise from the ground. For half a second, the room didn't breathe. And no one yet knew why. She had been invisible for months, assigned bad gear, wrong boots, old rifles. She never complained. Learned early that paperwork disappeared when your name wasn't worth remembering. She taped her boots when they split, cut them open when they crushed her feet, bled quietly, stood anyway. They called her clumsy, said she didn't belong, said some people were built for desks, not dirt. She heard it all. She remembered none of it. Because she was listening to something else. Wind, weight, pattern. The first time they sabotaged her on the range, she knew. The shot drifted wrong not because she missed, but because someone wanted her to. The sprinklers turned on only in her lane. Mud flooded her action. She didn't roll away, didn't shout. She shielded the rifle with her body, held position, let the water soak her bones. Mockery came easy to them. Discipline came harder. At night, alone on her bunk, she wrote nothing personal. No feelings, no rage, just numbers, pressure, angles, distances, patterns of cruelty disguised as oversight. She didn't yet know who would need it. She only knew someone would. By the time the general finished studying her face, the room had begun to breathe again. Uneasy breaths, confused ones. "What's your name?" he asked. She answered without lifting her chin. And somewhere deep in his memory, a ghost shifted. Why did she never fight back when it would have been so easy? Because she understood something they didn't. That violence without purpose is noise, and noise reveals you. They tested her endurance like it was a joke, loaded her pack heavier than regulation, rocks instead of sand, jagged edges digging into her spine. They watched, waiting for collapse. 5 miles, 10, she never broke stride. She matched the pace of the point man, forced him to run faster just to stay ahead of her. That bothered them more than defiance ever could. In the gas chamber, her mask failed before she crossed the threshold. Sabotaged. She knew instantly, felt it in the burn, in the way the air clawed instead of filtered. She didn't pound the door, dropped low where the air was thinner, sealed the breach with tape torn from her boot, held her breath past comfort, past panic. They left her inside longer than protocol allowed. She walked out on her own. Eyes red, skin burning, staring straight at the man who expected her to be unconscious. Something changed then, not in how they treated her, but in how they looked at her when they thought she wasn't watching. Fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. In the mess hall, they tried humiliation, spilled food, cold water dumped over her head, laughter sharpened to test whether she would finally snap. She didn't. She ate slowly, mechanically, like hunger was just another variable to manage. That unsettled them. Because anger they understood, silence made them nervous. Mail call came and went without her name, until one night an envelope appeared, read aloud, mocked, thrown onto the floor. She picked it up without checking the contents, slid it into her pocket. She already knew what was inside. She also knew who was watching to see if it broke her. It didn't. The obstacle course nearly did. A loosened rope, glass buried beneath the crawl pit, blood mixed with clay. She hovered above the ground on fingertips and toes rather than touch the traps laid for her. Pain teaches focus when you let it. By the time she vaulted the wall they thought would stop her, she had learned something important. They weren't trying to fail her. They were trying to erase her. An erasure only works if the target agrees to disappear. What does it take to remain steady when the world is trying to shake you loose? She learned the answer the night they swapped her navigation map. Old terrain, wrong elevations, dead trails. She walked until the land stopped matching the paper. Then she folded the map and looked up. Stars don't lie. She moved by sky and slope, by memory and instinct, found markers they had moved, avoided a live snare meant to break her ankle, rolled free with inches to spare. When they confronted her in the dark, lights in her face, words meant to shrink her. She didn't argue. She passed through them. North was still north, terrain still mattered, and their approval still didn't. Isolation followed, punishment by association, water cut, Wi-Fi killed, bunk stripped, mattress thrown out. She slept on bare metal springs. The sound kept others awake. Guilt has a sound when it can't be ignored. The photograph came next, her grandfather defaced, marked, a message meant to tell her they knew where she came from, what she carried. Her breath caught just once. Then she folded the photo, put it away, continued sewing her uniform with steady hands. She wasn't collecting wounds. She was collecting proof. In hand-to-hand training they tried to end it, weighted gloves, illegal strikes. A choke held too long. She felt the darkness coming. She didn't tap. She reversed the grip, ended on top, held the finish without striking, let him feel it. Then she stood and walked away. Disqualified, but alive. That's when the alarm sounded. Recon ambushed, a leader too far out for comfort, wind unstable, distance unforgiving. The general asked for a sniper, and the only volunteer was the woman they mocked. Why would anyone trust someone they had spent months trying to destroy? Because desperation makes hypocrites honest. The helicopter ride was quiet except for the engine. A sudden tilt meant to throw her from the open door. She locked herself in place with calm precision, looked back at the man who hoped she'd fall. He looked away. At altitude, her equipment failed one piece at a time. Greased bipod, sabotaged scope, screeching feedback tearing at her balance, blood from her ear, lies in her headset. She cut the wire with her teeth. Silence returned. She trusted wind over voices, touch over numbers, memory over permission. The shot took seconds to arrive. When it did, the target dropped clean. No cheer followed, no celebration. Just breathing. Back at base, they tried to bury it, called it luck, smashed the casing underfoot, started rewriting the story before it finished echoing. The general wasn't done. He ordered another test. No spotter, no correction, moving targets. 3 shots. 3 hits. Something broke then. Not in her. In them. Threats followed. Sabotage escalated. A friend injured for helping her. Evidence burned. Files altered. Until the past surfaced. A recording they thought was gone. A betrayal caught on grainy footage. Her grandfather left behind. Shot by the men now trying to erase her. The truth filled every screen. Silence swallowed the bass. What happens when the quiet one finally speaks? She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She stood. Evidence in hand, calm in voice, rage controlled like breath before a trigger pull. When the man who ruined her tried to threaten everyone with fire and fear, she ended it with a single instinctive shot. Not to kill. To stop. The unit fractured, loyalty shifted not toward her. Toward truth. On the final battlefield, wind screamed, distance mocked, no computer, no guide, just memory and resolve. She took the shot that shouldn't have been possible. It worked. When the smoke cleared, command offered her power. She didn't take it. She took her grandfather's photo from her pocket, faced it outward this time. Saluted. Not for rank, not for victory. For dignity. Because sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it waits. And when it finally moves, the world has no choice but to listen. Why did she feel more exposed in silence than she ever had under open fire? The laughter from the briefing room still clung to her like smoke, even hours later, when the bass had settled into its nightly rhythm of boots on concrete and distant generators humming. She lay on her bunk staring at the underside of the metal frame above her, counting breaths the way her grandfather had taught her when the world felt too loud. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow enough to steady the hands, slow enough to quiet the pulse. She had volunteered, that part was done. What haunted her wasn't their reaction. It was the look in the general's eyes, that flicker of recognition he'd tried and failed to bury. As if she wasn't just another soldier standing in front of him, but a memory he hadn't expected to survive this long. She rolled onto her side, the thin mattress creaking beneath her weight. Around her the barracks buzzed with low conversation. Names dropped, jokes sharpened. Somewhere down the row, someone imitated the way she'd stepped forward, exaggerating it into a parody. Laughter followed. It always did. She didn't turn. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the small, battered notebook she never let out of arm's reach. No diary entries, no confessions, just lines and figures. Wind speeds recorded from different corners of the range. Pressure changes before rain. Notes on how often equipment failed when certain officers were on duty. Patterns others dismissed as coincidence. She traced one entry with her thumb. It wasn't paranoia if it was measurable. The next morning began the way most did for her: wrong gear, wrong place, wrong expectations. At distribution, the quartermaster didn't even pretend to hide his disdain. He tossed a bundle of surplus at her boots, fabric stiff with age, straps cracked and tired. "Make it work," he said, already turning away. She did. She always did. She cut the boots where they pinched, taped the seams tight, and stood at attention for hours while blood soaked into her socks. She kept her posture perfect, chin level, eyes forward. It wasn't pride that held her up. It was refusal, the quiet kind that didn't announce itself. They noticed. They always noticed when she refused to break. The conditioning run came next. A ruck march meant to test endurance but twisted into something else entirely. Her pack was heavier than regulation. She felt it the moment she lifted it. Rocks instead of sand. Jagged edges pressing into her spine like punishment given shape. Someone smirked as she struggled to shoulder it. She didn't look at them. She stepped off with the rest of the unit, boots slapping the dirt in a steady rhythm. The pace was brutal. Hills rose and fell like waves meant to drown anyone who faltered. Sweat burned her eyes. Her shoulders screamed. Her fingers went numb from the straps cutting circulation. She stayed with the point man. Not behind, not ahead. With him. By the 5th mile, she heard breathing change around her. Shorter, angrier. They hadn't planned on having to keep up with her. That wasn't part of the joke. By the 10th, no one was laughing. When they stopped, bent over and gasping, she stood upright, chest rising and falling in controlled bursts. Her legs shook, but she locked them in place. Weakness was a private thing. You didn't hand it to people who wanted to use it. Someone muttered her name like it tasted bad. That night, the gas chamber drill crossed a line. She knew it the second she lifted the mask to her face. The intake valve was wrong, loose, compromised. Sabotage wasn't new to her, but this wasn't humiliation. This was danger. She considered saying something. Then she remembered who she was speaking to. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing the chamber in white fog. The gas burned instantly, claws scraping down her throat. Panic surged, sharp and animal, but she forced it down. Panic wasted air. Panic made mistakes. She dropped low, pressing her face near the concrete where the concentration was thinner. Hands moving by memory, she ripped duct tape from her boot heel and sealed the breach as best she could. Her lungs screamed. Her vision tunneled. She held her breath until her body begged her not to. She stayed. When the door finally opened, she staggered into the light, coughing, eyes streaming, skin flushed raw. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else looked away. The officer who'd overseen the drill expected her on the floor. Instead, she met his stare. No anger, no accusation. Just a promise he didn't understand yet. The range was worse. Rain soaked everything, turning dirt to slurry and rifles slick in the hands. She lay prone, body aligned, breathing steady. The first shot went wide, not because she misjudged, but because the stock shifted against her shoulder. She adjusted. That's when the sprinklers activated. Only her lane. Mud sprayed her face, flooded the action, threatened a catastrophic malfunction. She didn't roll. She clamped her hand over the bolt, turned her head to breathe, and held position while laughter rolled behind her. 2 minutes passed, then 3. The water chilled her bones. Her fingers went stiff. Still she stayed. When it stopped, she rose slowly, mud-streaked and silent. The score sheet came out. Mrs. announced loudly. Commentary added for effect. She heard it all like it was coming from underwater. Later in the mess hall, humiliation became personal. A spilled tray, a chair kicked at just the wrong moment, hot liquid down her front, cold water dumped over her head. The room waited. For tears, for rage, for a reason to justify what they were doing. She wiped her face, picked up her spoon, and kept eating. Her hands didn't shake. That unnerved them more than any outburst would have. Mail call brought nothing until it did. An envelope waved just out of reach. Contents read aloud. Private struggles exposed like sport. When it hit the floor, she retrieved it with care, smoothing the damp paper against her sleeve. She didn't open it. She already knew what was inside. That night she sat on her bunk and stared at the photo tucked inside her locker. Her grandfather's face looked back at her, eyes steady, familiar. Someone had drawn a crude mark across it, a target, a word meant to wound. Her chest tightened, just for a second. Then she folded the photo and slid it into her pocket. Evidence mattered, emotions could wait. The obstacle course left her bleeding. The rope went slack. The crawl pit hid glass. She adapted, lifting her body above the traps, muscles screaming as she moved inch by inch. Blood dotted the dirt behind her. They called it slow. They called it weak. She finished anyway. By the time she lay back on her bunk that night, body aching, she understood something with painful clarity. They weren't testing her ability. They were testing her willingness to disappear. She closed her eyes, listening to the barracks settle around her. Somewhere someone laughed. Somewhere else someone watched her door a little too long. She rested her hand over the notebook under her pillow. Let them watch. She wasn't going anywhere. Why did the night feel more dangerous than any battlefield she had trained for? Because darkness didn't just hide enemies, it hid intentions. She felt it the moment she stepped off the transport truck for night navigation training. The forest pressed in close, thick with pine and damp earth, the air heavy enough to taste. Headlamps clicked on and off around her as squads checked gear, joked nervously, adjusted straps. Someone bumped her shoulder harder than necessary. No apology followed. She checked her compass, steady, true. Then she unfolded her map. Something was wrong. She didn't react, not yet. She studied the lines, the elevation marks, the trails that should have matched the terrain ahead. They didn't. Valleys where ridges now stood. Paths erased by time and construction. An outdated map, deliberately so. Her jaw tightened. Turning back to request a correction would mean failure before the first step. She already knew the answer she'd get anyway. Smiles, shrugs, figure it out, Voss. So she folded the map, slid it into her pocket and stepped into the trees. The forest swallowed sound quickly, footsteps softened by needles and damp soil. She moved alone as assigned, counting paces, reading slope and shadow, without GPS, without guidance, just instinct and sky. She looked up through the branches. Stars still told the truth. Hours passed. The forest changed shape as elevation shifted. She reached the first checkpoint marker exactly where her calculations said it should be, only to find it gone. In its place, a crude drawing pinned to the bark. A stick figure crying, mockery carved into paper. She stared at it for a long moment. Not hurt, just tired. As she stepped back, something tugged at her boot. The snare snapped upward with violent speed. Her body moved before thought. She threw herself backward, rolling as steel bit into bark inches from her face. The wire vibrated with lethal tension. Had it caught her ankle, it would have shattered bone. She lay still, heart hammering, listening. Footsteps approached. Flashlights flared, blinding white beams cutting through the dark. Faces emerged, familiar ones, smirks barely hidden. "Lost?" someone asked, voice sweet with cruelty. They circled her without touching, a pack testing its prey. Words followed, soft, close, designed to crawl under skin. "You're a ghost here. Why don't you just vanish?" She rose slowly, dusting dirt from her sleeves. She didn't meet their eyes. She checked her compass instead. "North is still north," she said quietly. "You can move markers, you can't move terrain." She stepped through them, shoulder brushing one hard enough to make him stumble. Laughter followed her into the trees, but it sounded forced. Back at the barracks, the isolation tightened. Associating with her became a liability. Punishment spread like infection. Water cut when she entered the common room. Wi-Fi killed. Glares from women who once nodded politely now burned with resentment. She understood. Pressure finds the weakest seam. One night she returned to find her mattress stripped and tossed into the hallway. No note, no witnesses, just absence. She dragged nothing back inside. She lay down on bare metal springs wrapped in her poncho. Every movement made the bed frame creak, loud in the dark. She heard others shifting uncomfortably, unable to sleep. Guilt has weight when it's forced to listen. She closed her eyes anyway. The next day brought hand-to-hand combat training. The mat smelled of sweat and rubber. She was paired with someone twice her size, known for accidents. His taped gloves caught the light. Something hard glinted beneath the wrap. She saw it. The whistle blew. He didn't spar, he swung. She moved just enough to let the blow crash into the mat where her head had been. The sound echoed, sickening. He lunged again, rage taking over technique. He caught her, slammed her down, forearm crushing her throat. "Tap," he hissed, "beg." Her vision darkened at the edges. She didn't tap. She shifted her hips, hooked his ankle, and used his weight against him. In one fluid motion, she reversed the hold, ended on top. Her fist hovered inches from his throat. She held it there. 3 seconds. Long enough. Then she stood and walked away. Disqualified, the call came. She didn't look back. That night, alarms shattered the routine. Recon ambushed. Radio chatter filled with panic. Maps lit up in the command center. A leader too far out. Distance obscene. Wind unstable. "Sniper needed," the general barked. 1,800 meters. Silence. No one volunteered. She stepped forward from the shadows. "I'll go." Laughter tried to form, died halfway. They told her it wasn't a game, that lives were on the line, that failure meant bodies. She nodded once. The helicopter ride was quiet, tension vibrating through metal and bone. The pilot banked hard without warning, A violent tilt meant to throw her from the open door. She slid toward open air, wind roaring up to meet her. She locked her legs around the bench support and hung there, body suspended over nothing. Calm, controlled. She pulled herself back inside without help, eyes never leaving the man who'd hoped gravity would solve his problem. He didn't meet her gaze. At altitude, the tower waited, rusted, exposed, screaming with wind. As she climbed, a rung snapped under her weight. Sabotaged. She caught herself one-handed, muscles screaming, then swung outward, climbing the exterior frame instead. She didn't trust anything they touched. On the platform, the bipod slid uselessly. Grease. Another trap. She stripped off her jacket, rolled it tight, wedged it under the barrel. The cold bit deep, but the rifle steadied. She lay prone, breathing slowing, body merging with metal and stone. In the command center, bets were placed. She'll miss. Luck already ran out. The general watched the wind data instead. Through the scope, the world blurred. Panic flickered. Then memory surfaced, her grandfather's voice calm and patient. The scope is a luxury, wind is the truth. She tied a strip of cloth to the barrel, felt the air on her cheek, counted clicks by touch. Then the sound hit. A piercing screech in her earpiece, pain lanced through her skull, vertigo, blood warm against her neck. She ripped the wire with her teeth. Silence returned. The spotter fed her a correction. Wrong, deliberately so. She ignored it. She trusted the wind. She fired. Seconds stretched, then the target fell. Silence crushed the room. No one cheered. No one breathed. She exhaled slowly, pain washing through her body as adrenaline faded. Target down, came the call. Status, the general asked. Cold, she replied. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because somewhere deep inside the system that had tried to erase her, something had cracked. And cracks, once formed, have a way of spreading. Why did victory feel heavier than defeat ever had? She felt it the moment her boots touched the tarmac. Not relief, not pride. Weight. The kind that settles into the spine when you realize survival has made you visible, and visibility is dangerous. The rotor wash faded behind her as she walked away from the helicopter, rifle case slung over one shoulder, fingers stiff from cold and pain. Her head rang from the ruptured silence where sound should have been. Blood had dried along her collar. No medic rushed her. No hand clapped her back. They watched. Some with disbelief, some with resentment, a few with something close to fear. She bent down and picked up the brass casing she'd ejected before exfil. It was warm, flattened under a careless boot, crushed on purpose, proof erased in the simplest way possible. She studied it for a second, then flicked it toward the man responsible. It bounced harmlessly off his medals and fell to the ground. I don't collect souvenirs, she said quietly. I remember outcomes. He didn't reply, he didn't have to. His eyes said enough. Inside the debrief room, the air was thick with rewrites already forming. Words like luck, anomaly, unrepeatable. They hovered just beneath the surface, waiting to be spoken aloud and made official. She stood near the wall, listening. They didn't ask how she compensated without a scope, or how she'd stabilized a sabotaged rifle in gale force wind. Those questions led to uncomfortable answers. Instead, they spoke around her, over her, as if she were a piece of equipment that had malfunctioned successfully once. The general hadn't spoken yet. He watched. He always watched. Prove it wasn't luck, he said at last. No challenge in his voice, just gravity. The range was still wet from rain when they brought her out again. 3 autonomous targets at 1,000 meters. Erratic movement. No spotter. No corrections. The trigger on her rifle felt wrong the moment she took up slack. Gritty, uneven, deliberately fouled. She didn't comment. She adjusted her breathing instead. 3 shots, 3 impacts clean. The silence afterward wasn't admiration. It was dread. That night the barracks emptied for a mandatory morale briefing. She stayed behind, given permission no one expected her to use. She disassembled her rifle under the harsh fluorescent lights, laying each part on a cloth with methodical care. Metal shavings spilled from the trigger assembly. She gathered them onto a folded square of paper and slid it into her pocket alongside the notebook she never let go. Evidence. The lights cut out without warning. Footsteps stopped outside her door. A voice whispered through the vent, calm, almost kind. Accidents happen in the field. She didn't answer. She sat on her bunk in the dark, holding the firing pin like a blade, breathing slow enough to disappear. The steps retreated. The next day, they tried to break her body instead of her record. Live fire extraction drill. She was designated VIP, unarmed. The Fenrir squad assigned as protection. The irony wasn't lost on her. They moved fast through the mock urban grid, shouting, confusion. Someone tripped and slammed her into a wall. Another struck her helmet with a rifle butt hard enough to rattle her vision. Move it, someone barked. Baggage. She staggered but stayed upright. She realized then what they were doing. If she quit from injury, the narrative held. If she stayed and got hurt, it was her fault. She grabbed the vest of the man in front of her and pulled him close, using his body as cover as they moved. "Do your job," she murmured in his ear, voice low and steady. "Or I tell the general why you keep flagging the VIP." He froze. They finished the drill without another touch. The retaliation didn't stop. A crate of ammunition arrived for her new assignment. Old, corroded, unreliable. Logistics error, the explanation came easily. Shrugs, smiles. She spent 6 hours polishing each round by hand, weighing them, sorting them, turning junk into something usable through patience alone. That was when the engineer set a cup of coffee beside her, without a word. Under it, a replacement firing pin. She looked up. He was already gone. Kindness, she learned, was quieter than cruelty, but far rarer. The price for that kindness came swiftly. She heard the crunch of bone before she saw it, a hydraulic hatch, an accident, 3 fingers crushed, the engineer pale with shock, refusing to scream. Something inside her shifted. Not snapped. Aligned. She stepped between them, shoved the officer aside with enough force to send him into a rack of tools, and tied off the injured hand with her own scarf. Their eyes met. No words passed. They weren't needed. The joint briefing should have been routine. Allied command on holographic screens, data presented, names omitted. She stood in the shadows, cleaning her rifle. One of the foreign generals squinted at the feed. "Who is that?" he asked. The officer presenting tried to block the view. Too late. She racked the bolt. The sound cut through the room like a bell. "Move," the general ordered. "I want to see the soldier who treats a weapon like a sacred thing." The name came out then, reluctant, unavoidable. The question followed. Any relation to Archon Voss? The room held its breath. She stepped forward into the light. "Granddaughter," she said. Recognition flickered across the screen. Smiles followed. Behind her, fear sharpened. They tore her bunk apart while she was on duty, found the notebook, couldn't read it, burned it anyway. She returned to ashes. She didn't cry. She touched the soot and smeared it across her cheek. They didn't know she'd memorized every line. The Lost Patrol incident should have been routine. A wrong turn, a swamp, leeches clinging to torn fabric. Mockery came easily. She burned the leeches off without flinching, pointed out the signs they'd missed. Enemy scouts in the trees. 2 shots, 2 bodies falling. The laughter died. That night, the attempts became lethal. A charge slipped into her pack, ammo switched, a psych evaluation scheduled with a compromised doctor. She dismantled every lie calmly. When the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't her voice that carried it. It was the past. Grainy footage, a younger face, a wounded sniper abandoned, then silenced. The room erupted. She didn't. She watched. When the detonator appeared, she ended it with a single instinctive shot. Not vengeance, precision. The unit fractured. Loyalty fell away from the men who had led through fear. On the battlefield, with the base in chaos, she led anyway. Wind screamed, distance mocked. She closed her eyes, felt the air, remembered hands guiding hers long ago. The shot arced across impossible space and found its mark. The explosion lit the horizon. She collapsed backward, staring into smoke and sky, breath ragged, body spent. When command was offered, she didn't reach for it. She reached for the photograph in her pocket instead. Held it to the wind. Saluted. Because some legacies aren't inherited. They're reclaimed. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence after the explosion feel more frightening than the chaos before it? Because for the first time, no one was telling her what to do. She lay on her back near the ridgeline, lungs dragging air in shallow, uneven pulls. The shockwave had already passed, rolling down into the valley like a closing door. Smoke climbed into the sky in slow, dirty spirals. Somewhere below, enemy radios screamed into dead channels. The artillery threat was gone. So was the structure that had kept her moving. Hands reached for her shoulders, voices overlapped. Someone shouted for a medic. She blinked against the haze, forcing her vision to focus. The world tilted, then steadied. Pain settled in where adrenaline had been, dull and insistent. She pushed herself upright before anyone could help. That, more than the shot, changed how they looked at her. Back at the forward staging area, the mood was fractured. Relief tangled with unease. Orders barked, then contradicted. Units reorganized without waiting for permission. When leadership breaks, gravity shifts, and everyone feels it. She sat on an ammo crate, cleaning her rifle out of habit, fingers moving automatically. Blood crusted beneath her nose. Her hands shook just enough to remind her how close she'd come to blacking out entirely. Across the clearing, the Fenrir squad gathered in a loose knot. No laughter now. No swagger. The youngest among them kept glancing her way, then looking down at his boots. Guilt, she realized, had finally found a place to land. A runner arrived with orders. High command wanted statements, testimonies, timelines, words designed to harden into records. She stood when her name was called. Inside the command tent, the air was stale with stress and overheated electronics. Screens replayed fragments of the recovered footage on loop, grainy images of a younger war, frozen at the moment truth refused to die quietly. The men who had once controlled the narrative sat apart now, guarded, smaller. Their voices carried less weight than they thought they did. She was asked to speak. She didn't rush. She told them what happened, only what happened. No adjectives, no accusations. Facts stacked cleanly, one on top of another, until denial had nowhere left to stand. When she finished, no one interrupted. The general dismissed the room one officer at a time. When they were alone, he finally looked at her the way he'd avoided since the briefing room. "I should have seen it," he said. She shook her head once. "You did, you just didn't know what to call it yet." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. The days that followed were quieter but not kinder. Investigations moved slowly. Too many careers balanced on the outcome. Too many people hopping time would dull the edges. It didn't. Some avoided her entirely. Others overcorrected, sudden respect, forced politeness, salutes that came too fast and meant too little. She noticed all of it. Let none of it in. At night she slept lightly. Dreams came sharp and unfinished, wind without a source, hands guiding hers, a voice reminding her to breathe. She woke more than once with her fingers curled like they were still around a rifle stock. The engineer's recovery was slow. She visited him once, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed while he flexed bandaged fingers. "They won't touch you now," he said. She didn't answer right away. "They'll try," she said finally, "just differently." He smiled at that, not amused, relieved. The official charges came down a week later. Abuse of authority, sabotage, negligent homicide, words that sounded too clean for what they described. The men who had hunted her were escorted out under guard. The base exhaled. But something lingered. The Fenrir squad was reassigned under interim leadership. No speeches, no cleansing ceremony, just orders and a quiet understanding that things had changed. One evening, the youngest private approached her near the range. He stopped 3 paces away, posture stiff, eyes uncertain. "I didn't know," he said. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Now you do." That was enough. Her reassignment orders came shortly after, a new unit forming, smaller, independent, precision-focused. They wanted her to lead it. She read the orders twice before folding them. Leadership had never been her goal. Influence had always found her anyway. On her last night in the barracks, she packed slowly. The notebook was gone, but its contents lived on where they mattered. The photo rested in her pocket, edges worn soft. As she zipped her bag, she paused, listening to the quiet hum of a place that had tried to erase her. She felt no triumph leaving it behind. Only clarity. At dawn, she stood on the edge of the range one last time. Wind brushed past, familiar as breath. She closed her eyes and measured it out of habit. Some lessons never leave you. When she turned to go, the general was there. No entourage, no rank on his voice. "You changed things," he said. She considered that. "Things change themselves," she replied. "People just decide whether they'll keep up." He nodded. As she walked away, the sun broke over the horizon, lighting the range in clean gold. For the first time since she'd arrived, no one laughed. Not because they were afraid. Because they understood. And in that understanding, something quiet took root. The kind of respect that doesn't announce itself, doesn't ask permission, and doesn't forget. Why did the future feel more uncertain now that she had finally survived the past? Because redemption doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives with responsibility. The transport lifted off at first light, rotors cutting through a sky still unsure whether it wanted to rain or clear. She sat alone near the open ramp, boots planted, rifle secured, watching the base shrink beneath them. No one waved. No one needed to. She wasn't leaving as a victim. She wasn't leaving as a symbol. She was leaving as a soldier who had outlasted something quieter and far more dangerous than combat. The new unit waited hundreds of miles away. No name yet, no reputation, just a directive scribbled in precise language, low visibility, high trust operations, the kind that failed when ego entered the room. That mattered to her. When they landed, she met them without ceremony. 6 soldiers, different backgrounds, different scars, all carrying the same look, measured curiosity edged with doubt. They didn't salute right away. Good. She didn't introduce herself with rank or accomplishments. She asked one question instead. What do you need from the person next to you when everything goes wrong? The answers came slowly, clumsy at first, then honest. Trust, calm, competence, silence. She nodded. That's what I need too. They trained hard, quietly. She watched more than she spoke, correcting only when something endangered the whole. She didn't yell, didn't posture. When mistakes happened, she explained the consequences without humiliation. Some nights she stayed after, recalculating wind charts by hand, checking equipment herself. Not because she didn't trust them yet, but because trust begins with example. Word traveled as it always does, not loudly, not officially, but through sideways glances and altered tone. That unit runs different. That commander listens. That woman doesn't miss. The mission that followed wasn't large. No dramatic insertions, no speeches, just a hostile ridge line, a compromised ally convoy, and weather turning ugly at the wrong time. They moved at dusk. As they climbed, one of her soldiers slipped. Panic flashed. She caught him by the harness without a word, anchored him until his breathing slowed. Later, as they sat over watch, the same soldier whispered, "Thank you." She shook her head. "You'll do it for someone else." The shot she took that night wasn't the hardest of her life. It was the quietest. No sabotage. No voices in her ear trying to mislead her. Just wind, distance, and the steady presence of people who believed she would do exactly what she said she would. The target went down. The convoy passed unharmed. They exfiltrated before dawn. Back at the temporary safe house, exhaustion set in like a tide. Her team slept wherever they fell. She stayed awake, sitting by the window, watching rain wash dust from the street below. For the first time in years, her hands didn't shake. Days later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, restored, sharpened. Her grandfather, younger than she'd ever seen him, standing beside soldiers whose names history never learned. On the back, a note in unfamiliar handwriting. He wasn't forgotten, he was waiting. She closed her eyes and let the weight move through her instead of settling. She understood then that legacy wasn't about correcting the past. It was about continuing it honestly. The investigation concluded quietly. Official apologies were drafted and redrafted. Some were never delivered. Some were buried under administrative language designed to soothe without admitting too much. She didn't attend the final hearing. She was already deployed. On a later mission, pinned down by weather and terrain, her team looked to her without panic. She adjusted plans, rerouted, waited when impatience would have killed them. They made it home. On the flight back, one of them asked, "How did you know when to move?" She considered the question. "I didn't," she said. "I knew when not to." That answer followed them longer than any briefing ever could. Years later, though it never felt like years, she stood on a quiet range at dawn. No audience, no cameras, just a target in the distance and a rifle that had never failed her. She fired once. Clean. She packed up slowly the way she always did, careful, respectful. As she turned to leave, the wind shifted, brushing past her cheek like a familiar hand. She paused. Not to salute. Not to look back. Just to breathe. Because some battles are loud and visible, written into records and medals. But the ones that matter most are fought in silence, won through restraint, and remembered not by how they sound, but by how they change the people who survive them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.